Okay, so we left off, I'm gonna flip to the next slide. We left off right here with some swimmer's itch. I did have, I will say this real quick, I did have a question in the chat when the exams will be graded soon. I anticipate hopefully getting them all graded today. So bear with me. That stuff will, once, I don't know if you can see stuff when your specific test is completed, or if it will not open until they have all been graded. I don't know the answer to that, but you should start seeing stuff shortly. All right. Okay. So with that, we've glossed the surface of some of the skin infections. We've got a little bit into this chapter. I feel like the fun has just begun. So this image was showing a couple of different potentials with some Pseudomonas. There are all sorts of other possibilities for infections with Pseudomonas. It's also something that's kind of just normal in the environment. It likes water. It like, you know, there's opportunities for us to come in contact with this organism and not see any issues, right? But then there are other possibilities given the right circumstances, maybe, all right? And we will definitely see some details about some Pseudomonas with some other infections a little bit later on. I believe you guys have had an opportunity to see some Pseudomonas in the lab a little bit. And there are definitely some things that I think are pretty cool, all right? There are numerous bacteria that we have talked about before, and we're gonna focus more details on as we progress through, that have some capabilities of withstanding some of our immune response, and some of the mechanisms that they use to do that are the sugar coating or the capsule layers that they secrete around themselves. Then our immune cells, as they're doing surveillance, don't see the bacterium, they see the sugar coating, and sugar's okay, right? So they say, all right? And that lends to those organisms going undetected and potentially lending to actually establishing disease. So this image over here, this is an XLB agar, xylose lysine deoxycholate. It's a medium that allows, it's an enrichment medium that allows lots of organisms to grow. With that said, something that I think is interesting, and you can, down here you can't really see it very well, but up at the top, where the light's hitting it just right, these things are shiny, they're glistening. You can kind of see some light reflecting off of them. That's really indicative of a capsule layer, this shiny, glossy sort of appearance on these colonies. If you were to try to grab a little with your loupe, you'd see that it's really kind of sticky or slimy, kind of snot-like, I like to describe it as, and that's sort of gross, but it is sort of gross, all right? So that gives you some clues to some of these as far as maybe they've got the capsule, maybe they don't. There's staining techniques that you could do to verify, some negative staining that would show that sugar coating around the bacterium as it clears up, all right? There are other bacteria that don't produce that, and they would have more of a dull sort of appearance, not this shiny characteristic, all right? So that's one thing, and we can see these colonies growing. If we were to put these, the Pseudomonas onto some plates, I don't remember which ones you guys worked with in the lab, EMB or McConkey agar, I think it was EMB agar, the eosine methylene blue. Pseudomonas is a non-lactose fermenter. The E. coli that went on there should have made sort of a metallic green sheen. Pseudomonas wouldn't have produced any sort of coloration like that, kind of whitish colonies growing on the plate, and that's it, all right? So numerous ways we may be able to kind of grow it, visualize some things, and differentiate on some selective media. There's also some possibilities, not on your XLD agar, but on some other media. Nutrient agar is a great one for it. Pseudomonas growing in these circumstances where the agar is a little more see-through, has the potential to produce some pigments, some greenish pigments called pyocyanin, blue-green pigment. And this is something characteristic of our Pseudomonas, and really aeruginosa is a good one for this greenish production. I think there are some others, but it's definitely one of the main players that produces this pyocyanin. There are other circumstances, like maybe some wound infections, something like that, where you may have pus that's kind of blue-green, and that is also indicative of Pseudomonas infection, all right? They also can fluoresce. They're producing this fluorescin, which when exposed to UV light will glow, all right? And that, you know, potentially looking at the same plate, I don't know if that's true or not, but you can see these organisms fluorescing. I had a student in an upper division microlab a handful of years back that had a flashlight on his keys, and it had multiple buttons. One of them was a black light, I believe, that I learned real quick what he was doing. I had all my bacteria, my cocktails, because it's mixtures of bacteria that you have to in turn separate and weed out. Some pathogens, some normal flora. You got to figure out who's the bad guy with all of these good guys. All right. And he would walk up to the test tubes with all of the broth and shine his light on these tubes real quick, and one of them would glow. And he would grab it because he knew. And at first I didn't realize what was happening. And then I see him up at the bench and I'm like, what are you doing? Right? Brilliant, but no, right? If these are supposed to be unknowns to you and all you do is shine a light and you're like, oh, there's Pseudomonas, that's the one I want. That's kind of not fair. But I was impressed, right? So, and you're like, wait a minute, what about my unknowns, right? What if I shine a light? I think you guys are probably about done figuring out the unknowns. Is that true? So close. All right. I bet Pseudomonas is in there. So we've talked about acne. We started with some acne. And now we can see some images here. We talked whiteheads and blackheads, and we can see the details with this normal whitehead and blackhead. As I said, the oxidation of these oils lends to the blackhead formation. And as we zoom in here, we can see a bit of that on the nose. This one, and as I'm flipping through here, I'm like, would this have got me flagged? This doesn't look so bad, right? I think the bed sore looking thing plus the necrotizing fasciitis, both of those were pretty nasty. This maybe not so bad. So if you had it, you wouldn't say that. Cutaneous anthrax, and we'll see anthrax again. Cutaneous anthrax, skin infection where the organism or spores are inoculated into the skin through some sort of a wound, and you get these lesions, this black eschar that's characteristic of cutaneous anthrax. They grow very well. This is a blood agar plate, so it's got some extra nutrients in there, like the nutrient agar plates that we grow lots of stuff on, but some like some extra stuff, and they can really kind of thrive on a blood meal. With these plates, we've talked about some of this before, and we can see some bacteria that can feed on it and destroy it. Hemolyzing, beta hemolytic bacteria will give you a clearing on that plate. These aren't beta hemolytic, they're just growing on there. They're not destroying and sucking up all of the juices out of the blood, all right? But they grow super good on there, all right? They also, lots of bacillus will grow kind of like this, where they spread out really kind of taking over the plate if you give them too much time in the incubator. I would expect that this plate that was streaked for isolation, and we do have individual colonies, they look massive, but they are separate colonies. If we let this go another day or two, this whole plate could be completely covered, like a lawn of growth. Bacillus is something that we oftentimes say is a swarmer. It will just really kind of grow and take over. And if you have a mixture of bacteria, Bacillus, one of them, with some other players, it can make those other ones super hard to find because it will completely mask those individual, maybe little pinpoint colonies or something like that, with these massive overgrowth of Bacillus on the top. So we can see, and it looks like here we've maybe pulled a little bit off for some gram staining. Definitely some potentials with this. Cutaneous anthrax is something that's plagued humanity since really for forever. We think of this as, or have described it as wool sorter's disease, because it is something that's, or was pretty common in livestock and handlers. So sheep herders or the people shearing the sheep, whether that's the sheep herder or not, it was a pretty common occurrence to get infected with this because the bacterium is out in the environment, potentially getting on the hide of that animal. The sheep potentially, as it's getting sheared, the shearer may have a nick or a cut as they're doing this on their hands, where they get inoculated. And so you oftentimes would see this cutaneous stuff on the hands of these individuals. Yes?
Does the anthrax vaccine stop that kind as well?
Yes. And so with that, we can see, you know, like veterinarians, stuff, people that are really more at risk with that, we would think about that, right? Yeah, military gets it, but they're not thinking cutaneous, right? That's not
Like
on their,
shots. It's not a small.
yeah, it's,
And there's some side effects that are less pleasant.
kind of, yeah, not so good. But you're in the military, that's your job, right? Pincushion.
Yes, that part.
Yeah, so maybe not so good. As I said with, as we started this, there are lots of tables in all of these next chapters that describe some details about the specifics with some of these organisms, some of the culprit signs and symptoms, so on. So here we can see with the bacteria of the skin, a whole list of organisms or diseases. The respective organisms, and in some circumstances, there are numerous potentials, like our necrotizing fasciitis, Pyogenes maybe, Klebsiella, Clostridium, and some others, right? There are handfuls that might fit within these categories. And we've already talked a bit about that stuff, and this one is, I looked at one of them, and I'm like, oh, that looks just fine. This one's a little bit blurry in this point, so I'm not going to go through that in great detail. We showed a bit of conjunctivitis last time. This is another one, so we can see the purulent conjunctivitis, swelling and redness, lots of pus right within here. And there are definitely potentials with this, as it says, encrusted on the eyelashes, maybe sealing that eye shut. So we think of, you know, situation. There are numerous bacteria that we can think about with some conjunctivitis, but oftentimes pink eye, right at, you know, kind of the top of the list with this. And there are a few that can be culprits for that. Haemophilus is a good one. And we'll again see that. This image is a newborn with gonococcal ophthalmia neonatorum. And definitely some big issues and concerns with this. If it's not dealt with and treated, there can be serious problems, damage to the cornea, and possibly likely blindness that will result. It's issues like this that basically set the stage for any little fresh hatchling that's born in a hospital. All right, if you're, you know, born at your house, which can happen, that's maybe not something that needs to occur. But if it is in a hospital, it is the law that you get eye drops to prevent any of these issues, even if you say, I don't have gonorrhea, right? Matters not, right? We'll want to ensure that we cover those bases because you don't want this happening, all right? So every fresh hatchling gets some antibiotics. It used to be silver nitrate that they put in the eye. Now it's some antibiotic kind of gel that goes in there and prevents these potential issues in the first place. And so ultimately, you know, infected in transit through the birth canal. Trachoma, this also thinking treatment with antibiotics, all right? It can scar the eyelid. It can cause trichiasis. We could see here this, the eye lash is like flipping inward. It's just kind of disturbing to me. So in this case, it can lend to blindness if not dealt with and corrected surgically. So there are handfuls of infections within the eye. The conjunctivitis, as I said a second ago, Haemophilus is one of the main players when we think about pink eye, all right? So purulent discharge, we think about this as something that's pretty contagious. It's oftentimes thought of more of like little kids, elementary school aged, or pink eye. All of a sudden you get a kid with pink eye that shows up to school, which they shouldn't have in the first place. And then you get a bunch of kids that all come down with pink eye because it is really pretty infectious. So treatment with some broad spectrum topical antibiotics is a treatment for that. It also can potentially just run its course without the antimicrobials. Bacterial keratitis, and we're focusing again on the bacteria at this point. There are others that can cause keratitis that we'll think about in a bit, all right? Staph epi that we think of as typically just normal flora on the skin, no big deal, all right, can cause issues with the eye. So too can Pseudomonas. Redness and irritation, blurred vision, sensitivity, contact lenses or contact lens wearers that have some contamination with situations, the fluid, the saline solution, or whatever it might be. As those contaminated lenses go into the eye, it basically sets the stage for that. The neonatal conjunctivitis, we saw the Neisseria with that little dude, and the chlamydia trachomitis, that's the other one that that we looked at, all right? So inflammation and so on. And same below with the trachoma, all right? This is a granular conjunctivitis. And I like this because it's a potential to be transmitted by eye-seeking flies. They like to feed on your tears. That's awesome. And disturbing at the same time. All right. So shifting over to some other details, there are all sorts of types of warts. These, we think of different types of virus that set the stage for this human papillomavirus. Numerous potentials with this. So warts can vary in shape and in location. There's all sorts of potentials. This right here, I'm like, that I don't think I could deal with that. So plantar warts on the toe, filiform on the eyelid, all sorts of possibilities, and we'll hit more details with that in a bit. Another virus, cold sore, this herpes simplex virus 1, HSV. So we think there are numerous herpes viruses. When we think about skin stuff, we often think of type 1 and type 2, and I like to think of upstairs and downstairs. But it doesn't have to be that way, all right? You can definitely have them flip-flopped, but that's typically the case. So this cold sore, very characteristic, and with herpes viruses, they will take up residence on nerves and have the potential to reemerge at any point. So something that you truly don't get rid of.
Access is localized, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So where you get it
Is where you're gonna get it. Yep. Yep. This little dude right here, he just makes me laugh as he's all kicked back, arms behind, you know, he's like, hey, ladies. Okay, these more viral stuff as we're moving through here. And these are often things that we see in little kids, all right? Not that roseola can't happen a little bit later, but it's typically little kids, all right? So roseola, this is our first one. It's a mild viral infection. We see some cold-like symptoms, and then we get some rashes, all right? They start on the trunk and then spread outward. There are lots of things that little kids come in contact with. They get rashes. If we're thinking about these little dudes that are in the process of, you know, getting table food and introduced to all sorts of different things, the question is it a food allergy? Did I feed them something, right? You don't know, right? There's all sorts of things, stinking kids, right? So there are numerous things, right? But this is something that's a little bit different. You're like, you know, the symptoms aren't really pointing to food allergy, but sometimes you get some rashes that might be the result of something like that. So cold-like, then the rash. Fifth disease, also rashy, all right? The cheeks up here, I mean, I kind of wish we could see the other one because they don't have the big red kind of like slapped cheek sort of appearance that you do get with fifth disease, all right? And they say fifth disease because it's like there's a handful of rash-like diseases that they get, and this is like the fifth one, right? And I'm like, well, but what the heck is it, right? It's fifth disease, right? We don't know, all right? It's a type of parvovirus, all right? That's our fifth disease. There are, again, numerous types of those. There are some parvovirus that might get your dog, right? Not the same one, all right? But similar sort of an idea as far as the virus goes, all right? So there's cold-like symptoms with this as well, and then the rash with the, you know, the face with the slap cheek situation. It's also very contagious, respiratory secretions, and treatment with this is none, all right? Herpes, the type 1, as I said before, there are treatments with that, a handful of different antiviral, and this is herpes keratitis, so within the eye or the mouth, the papillomas, the HPV, the human papillomavirus, with some topical salicylic acid and other potentials for that. The roseola, human herpes virus 6 and 7, all right? Not the same as our type 1 up above, all right? And we see cold-like symptoms, high fever, and then the rash that shows up, all right? There are a few potentials for antivirals if the child is immunocompromised. Otherwise, usually it just runs its course. It's a relatively mild, self-limiting situation, all right? There are some potential questions about things like roseola for setting the stage for other situations later in life. Speculation that possible infection with roseola as an infant could set the stage for multiple sclerosis later in life. Not 100% with that, but it seems pretty likely that, you know, there are numerous things that can spur some autoimmunity based off of different types of reactions. And then the viral conjunctivitis, we saw lots of bacterial stuff, but viral adenovirus and some others, inflammation, but instead of the purulent discharge like our Haemophilus was giving you, this is a very clear watery discharge. So you kind of may know what's up based off of that. If it's pus-like, we're thinking bacteria, and if it's not, it's viral, right? This is something that is associated with common cold. There's all sorts of cold viruses, but adenovirus is definitely one that can cause a cold. And so issues with that setting the stage for eye involvement as well. Oh, man. I think these things are fun. So there are all sorts of cutaneous fungal infections, all right? And initially these things, well, they kind of were misclassified is really kind of the best way to describe it. We call them tinnias, and tinnia means worm because of something like our little friend over here, ringworm, which looks, at least superficially, looks as if maybe there is a worm under the skin, all right, causing this issue, all right? But it's not a worm, it is a fungus, all right? There are handfuls of different types, and in some circumstances, it's maybe just based off of where you might find them, all right? So we do name them based off of specific locations. Different tinnias. Tinnia barbae for the face, the beard, and ultimately results of, you know, issues shading that could set the stage with this. It makes me think of old school barbers with the, you know, the straight edge, and potentially one guy that's got a little of that, and then the next guy comes in and gets a shave, and now we've got multiple ones that are spreading that. That's a little bit disturbing. They're different with their practices than back in the old times, right? So we try to alleviate that. This is looking at in between somebody's toes right here. Athlete's foot is a pretty common fungal infection, something that probably lots of people could say they have had at some point in their life. This is something that all of them really are rather difficult to deal with, to treat, all right? And in a situation like our middle one, the athlete's foot, there's definitely potentials for this, for you to think you've dealt with it, and then to have it come back, whether it be reinfection or just the fungus got knocked down but not truly eliminated, and a little bit later it shows up, all right? There's all sorts of things that we think about with this, and with some of the antifungal agents for athlete's foot, stuff like sprays that you can put on there that help to kind of numb it a little bit. Tinactin is one of them, and the commercial says quick actin tinactin, that makes you think, sweet, I can clear up this athlete's foot tonight, right? And then if you read the bottle, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I have to apply it twice or maybe 3 times a day for at least a month. That's not very quick acting, right? But as soon as you spray it on your foot, you're like, oh, relief, right? So there you go. I had a bout of some athlete's foot that I blame on the skating rink. I'm not 100% with that. But I feel like that was probably where it was coming from, because I'm like, I don't know. If you do decide to do that and use someone else's skates, my advice to you is take an extra pair of socks. And when you're done skating, pull those socks off and put on a new pair of socks, and you're probably going to be okay. All right. But I don't know, no guarantees. Think about that, YouTube. All right. So here is a view of ringworm, another Taenia. All right. So Taenia pedis for the foot, Taenia barbae for the beard, Taenia capitis would be up on your scalp. Taenia corporis is on your body. All right. And there are all sorts of others as well. All right. But these some of the main ones. So Taenia corporis, ringworm, trichophyton is one of the genera that can cause these issues. Epidermophyton, and I know there's one more. We'll see it in a second. Can't remember all of these names right on, you know, it's there, but it's not right now. So all of these things growing on your skin, we think of these as dermatophytes. They're, you know, growing typically up in the epidermal layers, not deep down like the sporothrix that we showed an image of back. All right. This plate, it's a petri dish, but it's got something in there that's a little bit different than the media we use to grow bacteria. Sabouraud agar is a type of agar that is more specific for fungi, right? It also depends on the Sabouraud. The CC, I believe, is some antibiotics that are in there, clindamycin maybe. I can't remember the double C. 2 antimicrobials, I think, are added to this mix usually. And with that, it sets the stage to be inhibitory to lots of bacteria. So if we're trying to truly isolate the fungus, you might expect that there's going to be some bacteria that you would get as well. And you don't want those to be the main things that you're trying to grow. So we try to inhibit that and really select for the fungi. And the Sabouraud is the type of media that really does that. So on these plates, and I kind of wish we had 2 shots here, because when we look at fungi on plates, it's a little bit different than looking at the bacteria, where we really want to see the top of the plate to see how those colonies look. We want to see that with the fungi, but we also oftentimes care about what's underneath. And we flip the plate around and see the underside, because you can kind of see through this media, although it doesn't really look like it, you can. And the underside of the fungus can be very different than the top. And we can use that taxonomically to try to differentiate and figure out what we're really looking at with these, all right? So Trichophyton rubrum is a very common cause of some Taenias. And like I said, there are numerous ones, and it really kind of just depends on where we might find them, all right? There are other issues with some of these things, thinking something like athlete's foot, setting the stage for it to possibly lend to other parts of the body, like maybe the groin. They call that jock itch or Taenia cruris. And it can be the same culprit, it's just where it ends up getting inoculated, all right? Another tidbit of advice, if you are dealing with athlete's foot, and after you have bathed and applied your stuff, you should put your socks on and then put your underwear on, all right? Don't do it the other way around, because if you put your underwear on and your athlete foot toe touches your underwear, that's going to go someplace else, right? And that sets the stage for some other problems, all right? Another thing that will get me an R rating on YouTube, all right? There we go. Okay, so this is a different eschar, not our anthrax, all right? So this big ulcerated lesion with necrotic tissue, this is an infection with aspergillosis, and there's more to it than that, because what do we mean by secondary cutaneous? We'll hit that in just one second. So aspergillus is a pretty common mold We can see an image of the actual fungus in this next slide. And so there's the strands, the hyphae, and then the spores being produced in this conidiophore, the individual little spores. It kind of reminds me of like a dandelion with all of the little seeds that are going to blow away, all right? So this is, like I said, a pretty common fungi. We can see these in situations like a poorly ventilated bathroom, kind of the black mold, the little black bits maybe up toward the ceiling. Oftentimes it's some aspergillus. It sets the stage for all sorts of problems, all right? So these spores, we think about, numerous opportunities. And in this instance over here, inhalation of the spores establishes a pulmonary infection. There are numerous things that can happen that way. We'll hit that stuff a bit later on, all right? But this fungus can grow and proliferate within the lungs, and then it can disseminate, lending to the secondary types of infections. So this is a disseminative form where it is spread through the circulation and manifested on the skin, forming this cutaneous lesion, right? That's the secondary. It's the result of an infection elsewhere within the lungs, all right? That in turn progresses. And, it makes me think, it's got to be pretty stinking bad if you are infected with this pulmonary infection and then it has disseminated and now you're getting this stuff going on. You're molding from the inside out is basically what's happening, all right? Bad news, all right? And there are all sorts of other potential issues that it may do. Organ involvement, liver cancer is a possibility with some of the toxins that aspergillus may be secreting. Candidiasis, cutaneous candidiasis in this first image, red itchy rash. It's an opportunistic infection. So something that if your immune response is weakened or depleted, it sets the stage to be more likely to acquire this. Otherwise, probably not that big of a deal, all right? We can see over here a nail infection. This is another candida infection, so tinea ungum, infection of the nails. And there are some others besides candida that can get in there, all right? Other dermatophytes. So some of those tinnias could be causing this as well. The nail gets brittle, breaks, and can be pretty common in adults. It makes you wonder if some of the athlete's foot could also set the stage for this, and that's a possibility. There are a handful of potentials with some of this stuff with these nail infections for different types of treatments. One of them is an application of crystal violet, which we use in our gram staining, right? And a topical application. You'd have a purple toe, right? But you're going to get rid of this stuff, right? So kind of interesting. And I think you could go to the drugstore and acquire some of that if you have this going on, all right? I wouldn't dip my whole foot in there to try to cure my athlete's foot. I don't think that's a good idea, but an infection in the nail is different. So Candida albicans probably are culprit with these guys. These growing on these plates, sabrode again, look pretty different than these dermatophytes. This mold-like and this yeast-like, not like, it's mold and yeast, right? These yeasts grow very profusely, like kind of like the bacillus that we showed before that swarms and takes over, all right? So if we were to take these and look at them under a microscope, it's not going to look like these filamentous molds like our aspergillus. It's going to be a little oval yeast cell, all right? So all sorts of possibilities with that. So the mycoses, the fungal infections in the skin, truly are numerous. The aspergillosis, the cutaneous bit, fumigatus and flavus are the two species with that. And so there can be a couple of potentials, all right? It can be a direct inoculation. This is primary cutaneous aspergillosis, all right? So a wound and the fungus gets in there that way, all right? But the secondary that we saw the picture of is the result of it getting in through the respiratory tract, all right? And then disseminating. And that's a common occurrence in hospital-acquired or nosocomial infections, which is disturbing. The candidiasis, the cutaneous form, we saw some images with that, and it can be an overgrowth of normal skin microbiota. You have these yeast cells on you to begin with, all right? And it's a situation where maybe the stage is set where some of the bacteria that should be taking up residence get depleted, all right? There are all sorts of possibilities with that, all right? And, you know, we could see it in other areas of the body as well. Not uncommon to see some of these in your mouth, low levels, all right? But another idea, you know, with antibiotic treatment, something like that, where your flora gets depleted, thrush is an oral form of candidiasis. We oftentimes think about yeast infection, vaginal issues that set the stage. Same idea with depleted normal flora for these guys to proliferate. So we'll see candidiasis again, all right? The sporothrix we saw in previous chapter with the image. This is a deeper subcutaneous ulcers and abscesses, and oftentimes associated with, you know, rose gardening and other things. And then the tenias, there it is, microsporium. I knew there wasn't there. So these are the three main players: trichophyton, epidermophyton, and microsporium. There are a handful of species of each of these that set the stage for some of these infections from, again, the top of your head to the bottom of your foot, and anywhere in between, they could potentially take up residence. So itchy, possible ring-like lesions, coming in contact with the dermatophyte fungi, warm, moist environments sets the stage for that, all right? And a handful of antifungals for treatment. Some of these are some pretty potent agents that, you know, as I said, with something like the athlete's foot that may take prolonged treatment in the first place. Some of these others, we may be talking months of treatment to truly try to get rid of the actual organism, and it can have some serious side effects on the individual. Okay, so this next one, acanthamoeba, we think about some potentials with this for really a handful of different types of infections. It's a good one for the eye, as we're on skin and eye infections, but there are other possibilities as well, and it could cause some brain involvement. There's numerous things that can result. Acanthamoeba persists in the water. It likes cooler water, colder water, all right? It's common in unchlorinated water, all right? Chlorine is not a friend of these amoebas, all right? That's important, all right? So the organism gets in to us, all right? And ultimately can set the stage for all sorts of different possibilities, all right? And really kind of depends on the circumstances. So they enter through the nasal passages and infect the lower respiratory tract. We could see granulomatous amoebic encephalitis or disseminated disease if you're compromised, if you've got a depleted immune response. If it gets into the eye, it causes keratitis, which is really the thought in here in this chapter, because that's what we want to think about. We're not talking respiratory stuff today, but it's here because this figure's from the CDC. I know that. It lists off all sorts of different possibilities, right? It also can get in, so these are all different ways they get into you, right? Through ulcerated or broken skin, also getting into the circulation, causing this granulomatous amoebic encephalitis. So, or dissemination again, if you're compromised. So seeing cysts and or trophozoites, remember the trophozoite stage is the active feeding stage, and the cyst stage, the resting stage of those organisms, those parasites, whatever they might be, in this case, amoebas. This just, every time I see this, I'm like, oh, that's so disturbing. So this is a person's eye that has some sodium fluorescent applied to it that allows it to glow. This is basically showing the infection, the cornea getting destroyed as it gets in there and causes these issues. Acanthamoeba is, like we said, it likes water environments. It's pretty common in the environment, but most of the time we don't think any issues of it. All right. Seeing this eye, it is a problem when we think about contact lens wearers, and there are issues with people that may unintentionally infect themselves. Sometimes people decide to make their own lens solution, make some saline up, and use that for their eyes. That sets the stage, if you don't do things quite properly, for that organism to be there, and then you infect yourself. Probably a decade ago, maybe a little bit longer, there was a contact lens solution company, a common company that sells stuff that had some issues. And they, for, maybe something didn't get sterilized quite adequately. I don't know exactly what happened, but they had a huge lot of contact lens solution that was contaminated with acanthamoeba, and numerous individuals became infected. I had a student in my parasitology class, it wasn't her, but it was her kid, that got infected with this stuff. He didn't go blind, but it required some pretty lengthy treatment to try to really get rid of it. And as I said last time, your eye is a protected site, right? It's a privileged site. So infections here are big problems, right? And trying to get stuff in there and deal with it, also a big problem. So cyst, the amoeboid form, and then in the eye. And this, I like this because you can kind of see it. Acanthamoeba has pseudopods. Amoebas have these pseudopods that pull themselves, pushing out their cytoplasm and moving through their environment, all right? Oftentimes you think of them as kind of round projections. These are like spikes. Acanthamoeba, acantho means spike or spiny, all right? And these projections are almost like little needles as they shoot them out to move, for locomotion. Different than some of our other amoeba that we'll think about probably next time. All right, guys, quit with that. Quit with the green eye.